I kept the boys because no one else would. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain it. They hear Grandpa raised 2 kids for 9 years and they picture some kind of saint. I wasn't a saint. I was a retired electrician from Sudbury, Ontario, with bad knees, a pension from the IBEW, and a house that still smelled like my late wife's cooking, even though she'd been gone for 4 years. I was 63 years old, and I thought the hardest part of my life was already behind me. Then my daughter showed up on a Tuesday in November with a garbage bag full of children's clothes and 2 boys who looked like they hadn't slept in 3 days. Logan was 7, Evan was 4. She told me it would be a week, maybe 2. She needed to get sorted. I didn't ask what that meant exactly because I already knew. I'd been watching her get unsorted for the better part of a decade. The men, the moving around, the things she wouldn't explain on the phone. Her mother used to cry about it in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. She kissed the boys on their heads, told them Grandpa made the best pancakes in Northern Ontario, which, for the record, is true. And then she walked back to the car that was waiting at the end of the driveway. I didn't recognize the driver. I didn't go ask. Logan stood on the porch and watched until the taillights disappeared. He didn't cry. That was the part that broke me. A 7-year-old who'd already learned not to cry when his mother left. I brought them inside. I made pancakes. That was the beginning of 9 years. The first winter was the hardest, practically speaking. I had to figure out school registration, which required documents I didn't have, and a letter from my daughter that took 3 weeks to arrive and was barely coherent when it did. The woman at the Sudbury Catholic District School Board. Her name was Yvette, and she had the patience of someone who had seen this exact situation many times before. She helped me navigate the forms without making me feel like a criminal. I think about Yvette sometimes. Small kindnesses from strangers. I converted my home office into a bedroom for the boys. Bunk beds from the Leons on LaSalle. Logan claimed the top immediately, which was fine by me. Evan had nightmares for the first 2 months, and I'd hear him through the wall. Small sounds, not quite crying, and I'd go in and sit on the edge of the mattress until he fell back asleep. Some nights I sat there for an hour. My back would kill me the next morning, and I didn't care at all. My daughter called sporadically through that first year. Christmas, she called. Easter, nothing. Logan's birthday in March, she called at 11 at night after he was already asleep, and I could hear in her voice that she wasn't well. I told her the boys were fine. I didn't tell her about Logan's science fair project, or Evan's tooth coming in crooked, or the note from the teacher saying Logan had started helping the younger kids at recess. I don't know why I kept those things back. Maybe I wanted to hold on to them. By year 2, the calls slowed to every few months. By year 3, it was Christmas and nothing else. By year 4, even Christmas was hit or miss. I retired properly at 65. I'd been doing some part-time consulting work to keep busy, and the pension from the union was enough to keep the house and feed us reasonably well. We weren't going on vacation to Florida like some of my neighbors, but Logan played hockey in the Nickel City Minor League, and Evan did scouts, and we had enough for the registration fees and the equipment. That was enough. That was everything, actually. I had a neighbor, a man named Cecil, who'd been my friend since we both coached Pee-wee hockey in the 90s. He lived 3 houses down with his wife Norma, and he became something like a backup parent over those years. He drilled the boys when my knees made it hard to manage the winter stairs quickly. He taught Logan how to change a tire in the driveway one Saturday afternoon while I watched from the kitchen window and felt something strange. Pride and grief tangled together in a way I couldn't name. It was Cecil who first noticed something was wrong 9 years later. He called me on a Thursday evening in September and said, "There's a woman who's been sitting in a car outside your place for 2 days. Silver sedan, Ontario plates, but not local. Thought you should know." I didn't think of my daughter right away. I should have. Instead, I thought it was some kind of mistake, someone looking for a different address. It wasn't a mistake. She knocked on a Friday morning, early enough that Evan was still home. He was 13 now, quiet in the way he'd always been, doing something on his laptop at the kitchen table. Logan was 16 and already at school. He'd gotten a morning shift bagging groceries at the Freshco on Notre Dame and went straight from there to first period. I opened the door and it took me a moment, not because I didn't recognize her, because I did. And she looked so different, and also so much the same, and the 9 years collapsed, and I felt like I was standing in the driveway again, watching taillights disappear. She wasn't alone. There was a man beside her in a suit jacket. He had a leather folder under his arm. He didn't offer his hand. She said my name. She said she'd come to bring the boys home. I said, "This is their home." The man in the jacket said he was a lawyer. He said she had parental rights that had never been formally relinquished, and that as the biological mother, she was entitled to take the children. He used words like rectify and reunification. I kept looking at my daughter while he talked. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking somewhere past my shoulder into the house, like she was calculating something. I told them both to leave my property. The lawyer said that could be arranged in a more complicated fashion if I preferred. Then he handed me an envelope, and they walked back to the silver sedan. Cecil called that evening. I think he'd been watching from his window. "Was that her?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "Christ," he said. "And then what do you need?" I opened the envelope at the kitchen table after Evan went to bed. I read it 3 times. It was a formal notice. She was applying to the Ontario Court of Justice for custody, and in the documentation her lawyer had filed, there was language I hadn't expected. Language that described the boys as being retained without consent, that described my keeping them as a prolonged, unauthorized custody arrangement. There was a word in there that I had to read 4 times before it settled. Abduction. I sat at that table for a long time. I thought about Evan at 4 years old, sitting on a stranger's bunk bed, trying not to cry. I thought about 9 years of parent-teacher nights and flu seasons, and the conversation I'd had with Logan last spring, when he asked me quietly, not looking at me, if his mother was ever coming back. I thought about Yvette at the school board office, helping me fill out forms with patience and kindness. I thought about what it had cost me to be here, and what it would cost the boys if I couldn't hold on. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Isabel, someone Cecil's wife Norma knew from her church group in Hammer, and she agreed to see me the next morning. Isabel had a small office on Paris Street, and she was direct in a way I appreciated. She read the filing, asked me questions I answered carefully and completely, and then she set down her pen and said, "Mr. Hartley, the law in Ontario is not straightforward on this. What she has filed is aggressive, and the fact that there was no formal custody agreement in place does complicate things. But the children's best interests are the primary consideration, and 9 years of stable care is not nothing. We need documentation, everything you have. School records, medical records, the letter she sent in year 1, proof of financial support, any communication, every email, every card, every voicemail if you saved them." I had saved them. I don't know why. Some instinct I hadn't been able to name. I had 2 banker's boxes in the closet of my old office, Logan's room now, that I'd been adding to without thinking much about it. Report cards, doctor's letters, hockey registration receipts, the school board forms from year 1. A birthday card Evan had made me out of construction paper in grade 2 that I absolutely was not going to give to anyone under any circumstances, but would show them if I had to. I brought the boxes to Isabel the next day. What I didn't have yet, what Isabel said would help most, was any documented communication showing that my daughter had voluntarily left the boys in my care and had not been in contact or providing support for the bulk of those 9 years. The letter from year 1 was helpful but partial. If there were texts, if there were emails, if there were voicemails she'd left that I no longer had access to, any of those. I mentioned that there might be voicemails on an old phone I'd replaced around year 4. I'd kept the phone in a drawer in the kitchen because I wasn't sure why, just hadn't thrown it out. Isabel's eyes went very still when I said that. "Find the charger," she said. What I didn't know yet was that the situation was going to get worse before it got better. 2 weeks after receiving the notice, I came home from Isabel's office to find a police cruiser parked outside. 2 officers, young, professional, uncomfortable. One of them asked if I was the grandfather of Logan and Evan. I said yes. He said there had been a complaint filed and they needed me to come in for questioning regarding the welfare of the children. I said, "I want to call my lawyer." They said that was absolutely my right. At the station, the OPP detachment on Regent, I sat across from an officer named Constable Theriot, who was polite and thorough, and clearly didn't enjoy this particular interview. He asked me questions about when the boys had come to live with me, whether I had ever prevented their mother from contacting them, whether I had ever threatened her or withheld access. I answered every question plainly. Isabel was beside me. We'd been on the phone before I'd even left the driveway. What I found out afterward, from Isabel, who found out from a colleague, was that my daughter's lawyer had filed not just the custody application, but a separate complaint suggesting the children were being held against their will. That's the word they used. Against their will. Logan was 16 years old. He'd been at Freshco that morning bagging someone's groceries and planning to apply to Laurentian's engineering program in 2 years. Evan was 13 and had a scout camping trip the following weekend and had been annoyed all week because I wouldn't let him bring more than one video game, against their will. I went home that night and sat in the kitchen and looked at the old phone charging on the counter, and I thought about everything I stood to lose and everything the boys stood to lose, and I realized that losing was not something I was willing to do. But here is where the story took a turn I hadn't expected. Because the day after the police interview, Constable Theriot called Isabel and told her, somewhat carefully, that certain witnesses had provided statements supporting the complaint. Neighbors, people in the area. I won't name them because I've made a choice to let that go, mostly. But there were 2 people I had considered friends who had given accounts of things they claimed to witness that were not accurate. I don't know what they were told or what they were offered. I know what they said wasn't true. That was the loneliest moment of those 9 years. Sitting at the kitchen table, reading a summary of what my neighbors had said about me, people I'd waved to, people whose driveways I'd helped clear in ice storms. Cecil came over that evening uninvited, which is something he did sometimes, and which I had never once minded. He sat down across from me, looked at the papers on the table, and said, "Who do you need me to talk to, and what do you need me to say?" I said, "The truth. Just the truth. That's the only thing that's going to work." He said, "Easy. I've got 9 years of truth." The phone was a BlackBerry. This tells you something about how long ago year 4 was, and finding the charger required a trip to a second-hand electronics place on Elm Street, run by a young man named Theo, who took one look at it and laughed, and then disappeared into the back of his shop and came out with a charger that worked. I offered him $20. He said 5 was fine. The phone booted up slowly. I stood at the kitchen counter at 11 o'clock at night, watching it load, feeling something I can only describe as fear mixed with hope, which is an unpleasant combination. There were 11 voicemails. The most important one was from year 3. My daughter's voice, unmistakable even through the compression and the years. She was not well when she left it, I could tell, but she was clear. She said she knew she'd left the boys longer than she meant to. She said she was grateful they were with me. She said she wasn't in a position to take them back right now, and she knew that wasn't fair. She said she trusted me with them. She said, "Dad, I trust you with them. I need you to keep them safe." I stood in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night and listened to that voicemail 4 times. Then I took the phone to Isabel's office first thing in the morning, and Isabel listened to it once, made a note, and said, "This changes things considerably." The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in January at the Ontario Court of Justice on Elm Street. I wore the same suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral, which felt appropriate in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Logan asked me the night before if he could come. I said the proceedings weren't open to the public in that way for minors. He looked at me and said, "Grandpa, I'm 16. I want to talk to someone. A judge, a social worker, whoever. I want to tell them what I know." I called Isabel that night. She made arrangements. A child welfare advocate, a woman named Dr. Singh from Laurentian, met with both Logan and Evan separately. 2 days before the hearing, I was not in the room. I didn't ask them afterward what they'd said. I trusted them to say what was true. The hearing itself was not dramatic in the way courtroom scenes are in movies. It was quiet and procedural, and the room smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. The judge, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and a very still face, reviewed the filings, heard from both lawyers, considered the documentation. Then she asked about the voicemail. Isabel played it in the courtroom. The room was very quiet when it ended. My daughter's lawyer tried to argue that the recording was taken out of context, that circumstances had changed, that my daughter had since stabilized her life and was prepared to provide a home. The judge listened carefully. The judge was the kind of person who listened to everything before she responded, and when she did respond, it was measured and precise. She said the court's primary obligation was to the best interests of Logan and Evan. She said 9 years of documented, consistent care from a grandparent, combined with a recorded statement from the biological mother expressing voluntary and grateful reliance on that care, combined with the testimony of a child welfare professional reporting that both children had expressed clearly and independently that they wished to remain in their current home. All of that constituted significant and substantial grounds for determining where their best interests lay. She said the word abduction had been applied in this case in a manner that the evidence did not support, and she was troubled by it. My daughter's lawyer started to respond. The judge raised one hand, very slightly, and he stopped. The order was for Logan and Evan to remain in my care, with a formal guardianship arrangement to be filed within 30 days. My daughter was granted supervised contact, scheduled and structured, if the boys chose to engage with it. The welfare advocate would be a point of contact for that process. The supervised contact, for the record, has been exercised exactly once in the 14 months since that ruling. That was the boy's choice, not mine. I keep that door open. I always will. What I think about now, mostly, is the morning after the hearing. I went home and Cecil came over and Norma made coffee, and the 4 of us sat at my kitchen table and didn't say much. Evan came downstairs in his pajamas, poured himself a bowl of cereal, looked at all of us and said, "So we're staying." I said, "You're staying." He nodded like this was a scheduling matter that had been resolved and went back upstairs. Cecil laughed so hard he spilled his coffee. Logan was at school. He'd asked me to text him when it was over. I sent him 3 words: "We're all good." He sent back a thumbs up, and then, a minute later, a second text that said, "Thanks, Grandpa. That's not nothing." From a 16-year-old, that is actually everything. Tio, the young man from the electronic shop, got a card from me with 2 hockey tickets inside. He sent back a thank you note that was extremely polite and slightly baffled. Isabel got a bottle of Niagara ice wine and a handshake that I meant with everything I had. Cecil got nothing because Cecil doesn't want anything, which is exactly the kind of man he is. I'm 66 years old now. My knees are worse. Logan is in his 2nd year at Laurentone Engineering, like he planned, and he comes home on long weekends and complains about the meal plan in a way that makes me unreasonably happy. Evan is 15 and has opinions about everything, and a group of friends who seem to spend every Friday night in my basement playing video games and eating my food, which is fine with me. The noise is fine with me. My wife used to say that the family you end up with is sometimes different from the family you planned, but it's no less yours for that. She was smarter than me about most things. I raised these boys. I fed them. And when someone tried to take that away, tried to turn 9 years of love into a crime, I fought back the only way I knew how, with the truth and the records I'd kept without knowing why, and the testimony of 2 boys who knew exactly where home was. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.